Shepherd. Welcome back to another episode of Valley Chat. Pastor John here with Pastor Scott. And today we are digging into the second half of our July preaching series, Words of Wisdom. What does it mean to look at some of the wisdom books of the Bible and dig into their deeper, just more meaningful kind of insight that they have, especially in today's world? Today we're looking at Job and Ecclesiastes, not known as some of the more cheerful books of the Bible, but Pastor Scott, I know they're close to your heart. They certainly are close to mine. Can you just give us your general impressions of Job and Ecclesiastes? Then we'll dig into Job and dig into Ecclesiastes.
Job and Ecclesiastes are books that benefit by being read repeatedly. That's what I'll say, as just an overarching statement. Because if you read Job just one time through, you get the gist of the story, but it's so long. There are so many different aspects to it. There's no possible way in one sitting you can get it all. And the same thing with Ecclesiastes. If you just read it one time through, the takeaway will be everything's meaningless. Everything is a chasing after a wind. Pessimistic, sad. But by reading it over and over again, you realize that there is a little bit more going on than what I think we experience on the surface. So Job, Ecclesiastes, just like Proverbs, they are meant to be marinated in. Think of the word marinade. You want to marinate your soul in them repeatedly.
They're deep wells. There's so much to draw from. And so let's just talk about Job for a little bit, because I think oftentimes you come across somebody who reads through Job for the first time or the first time in a while, and maybe they stop you after church on Sunday, or they stop you at a Bible study and say, "Pastor, I read through Job. A lot of questions. How could God act like that and throw one of his own followers under the bus? Why would God take everything away from somebody only to give it all back? How do his friends who are so negative, why are they still in his life?" And then it just ends with this kind of happy ending. Can you just give me a little bit of something to help grapple with that kind of, puzzling sort of challenge?
Yeah, for me, Job is not the beginning, the middle, or the happy ending. Job is the penultimate part, which is chapters 38 to 42 and a half, I believe. And that is where God asks a series of questions. And essentially, as Job, throughout the course of the book, is being encouraged by his friends, even his wife, just curse God and die. Your life is so awful because of what happened in the early part of the book. Just curse God, die. You've clearly done something to deserve this, so bring it to completion so that we can all get on with our lives again and hopefully make some new start of it. God comes at just the last moment and asks the question, who are any of you to question why I have the good basis to bring such sadness and trial into Job's life? Basically, God says, I get to do anything I want without ever sacrificing the integrity of my goodness and character, and everybody else in humanity can just keep their mouths shut and accept that state or, sad turn of circumstance as it is received. And it's kind of, for me, that's the heart and soul of the book for me, are those final 3.5 chapters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it speaks directly to the heart of a lot of the issues that arise in somebody in our culture, in today's society, when it comes to ideas around religion, ideas around who God is, my place in the universe, my place before God. For somebody who's reading this 2,000 years ago, who's living in a mindset that's accepted and embraced by everyone around them, that God is this ultimate powerful authority and the one who metes out reality to you. There's no confusion as to his righteousness or his justification in playing this kind of role in somebody's life. But for you and I, we're scandalized by this because I've grown up in a world where I'm in charge, where I'm my number one priority, where no one knows what's best for me except for me.
Right.
And so I'm challenged by this kind of attitude by God. But it's so important for us because when we read through books of wisdom, like we talked about last time, wisdom is something that you get through asking God for it. Fearing God is the beginning of wisdom. And a book like Job gives us a starting point for wrapping our minds around what does it mean to fear God? Yep. What does it mean to recognize his mighty power, to recognize my insignificance, my fragility, And then how does that speak to my navigation of the things that inevitably I'll face in life?
Right. For me, just to make it really intensely practical, there's this weird thing that happens when I go into hospital rooms as a pastor. And the question will be from the patient, from the family, why is God allowing this to happen? As if there's an agent out there, external to God, external to us, and this agent, whatever it is, whoever it is attempting to bring a sad disease, a sadness, some kind of negative experience upon us. The question is safely asked, why does God allow this external agent to do this to me? And we see that in Job, right? Satan wants to tempt Job and so on, and God allows it. By the time you get to the end of Job, that allowance kind of language is really not to be found. God says, I didn't allow Satan to do this to Job. I was active in the commission of it. And by the way, I get to do that because I'm God, and I'm good, and I'm all powerful, and I'm all wise and providentially, comprehensive. I govern all things perfectly. And so God at the end of Job says, there's no allowing this to happen. I was part and parcel of the sad demise of Job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are you going to do with that? And so I've been in the hospital room with people, and I've actually said to them, what if God's not allowing you to have cancer? What if God's not allowing this situation to occur? What if God is actually causing this to happen for a greater purpose that we cannot see or know? And that changes the whole dynamic of the conversation, because what it does is it puts God squarely in control of all things. Now, there's a whole mess because of that question, but it is a question that Job forces us to ask.
A couple thoughts that are occurring to me. On the one hand, the strongest faith I've seen in people that inspires me and encourages me and keeps me going in our line of work, in hospital visits, home visits, phone calls, care, is the attitude that God has a reason for this. I may not know what it is, but I am going to trust that it's up to Him. I'm going to ask Him to make my life easier. I'm going to ask Him to heal my disease, to make the operation go successfully, to bring back health and strength into my body or the body of my loved one. But ultimately, I know that my trust in Him is not based on the results of those prayer requests or the results of operations or the results of health workers. Mm-hmm. It's in the fact that God has given me His grace and then said, you're a tool in my hand. You're a part of my plan. Trust me. Right. And that's really, these books challenges us with the basics of faith. Faith is God giving you a promise. Right. And then when life challenges you to hang on to that promise, what are you going to do with it? Yeah. Are you going to believe it despite the circumstances and have the trust and the faith? Or will you decide, to go another way? Will you reject it? And so on the other hand, the other thing that occurred to me is when you read through Job, a couple of practical things really do settle for us. On the one hand, the scandal. Right. Job's never told about the conversation that Satan and God had at the beginning of the book, where God says, have you considered Job? He's the best of the best. Right. Go give it your best shot.
Sinless.
And Satan absolutely goes after Job, takes away everything, takes away his family, takes away his health, takes away his possessions, takes away his friends. They even turn against him and tell him to curse God. That's not what a real friend would do. On the other hand, we have these other experiences where Job's friends do grieve with him. They do sit with him. They do engage with him and speak with him and listen to him. So we do see in his friends kind of an example of what friendship is supposed to look like. And then, of course, in Job, we see this faithfulness to God's promise. Mm-hmm. He may acknowledge that life seems worse than death at times, but he never says, I will be the one that makes that choice. Right. He always says, if God's going to take my life, glory be to Him. If He's not, then I've got to survive this. Yep. And then God shows up and says, where were you from the beginning?
There's this song by Laura Story. It is so, on the one side, I want to say it's a great song, and I'm talking about it. On the other side, it's just a little bit weepy and, kind of, I don't know, sappy. But it really is a great song. We'll put it in the liner notes for this podcast so that you can listen to it on your streaming service. But, the name of the song is Blessings. And by the end of the song, Laura Story asks the question, what if all the negativity and all the sadness and all the struggle we go through in life is really the work of God in order to bring us to a greater place of faithfulness. And that for me is essentially at the heart of Job. When we undergo turmoil or stress, spiritually especially, is it possible for us in our heart of prayer to acknowledge, God, I know that you are not absent and out of control of what I'm going through. And while I'm not going to assume you're doing this just because you're fickle or you find it funny, to see me go through tragic circumstances, lead me to a place where I acknowledge your goodness, beyond these circumstances. And I think it's an important part of the narrative.
I think a foundational piece of wisdom in the life of faith is recognizing that we can't really know or grasp anything about God on our own power or our own intelligence.
Right.
Our own investigation will only take us so far. We have to trust in what he's told us and revealed to us through his son, Jesus.
Right.
And Jesus has said, God loves you. He has sent a Savior for you. And when you trust in his promises, he is involving you in his plan of salvation narrative for the entire world. And that gives you stability where Job's language now in navigating hardship can help give you a voice of faithful processing and faithful suffering almost.
Yep.
Recognizing that even when everything's taken away, there is still a place in God's own word we can turn to give us stepping stones to walk through these challenging days and seasons together.
Let's do Ecclesiastes. Let's talk about that. But then I do have a little teaser for those of you listening to this podcast to stick with us through the Ecclesiastes conversation, because I do want to come back for one little cherry on top of this podcast Sunday with the book of Job.
Absolutely.
So let's go to Ecclesiastes.
Absolutely.
Make sure we come back to Job.
If Job is the angle of everything's been taken away,
right,
Ecclesiastes takes a different angle where now you have had everything you can imagine.
Yep.
The wealth, the vocation, the relationships, the length of life, comfort. Ecclesiastes, written, traditionally understood to be written by Solomon later in life. He's reflecting on the things he's accomplished, the things he's done, the things he's learned. And at the end of the day, he, of course, says,
meaningless, a chasing after the wind.
Everything is meaningless, vanity of vanities. Nothing is new under the sun. Ultimately, everybody dies, and therefore the best you can do is eat, drink, and be merry. Do the work God's given you to do.
Yeah, well, and I'm 53, and I will say this. When I was reading Ecclesiastes at 20 years old, it was more of an academic at a distance, and now at 53, having been through, kind of the vibrancy of my youth, now looking toward retirement, I get where a guy like Solomon was coming from. And I'm not saying I'm dour or an Eeyore, type character right now. I still have hope. I'm still excited for, waking up in the morning, but I get it. I really get it. And, asking the question, what really is important as I'm going to finish out, the next 20 to 30 years worth of living, God willing, what do I really want to focus on? And the simple things of eating, drinking, and just having a good time with my friends and family, those things outweigh the value of all the grand and glorious conquests that I dreamed about when I was in my 20s.
One thing that a lot of my seminary classmates, as we were making our way through our systematic theology classes, our application of theology in the world from a theoretical point of view. How does this actually work? What does this look like on paper? A theme that came up, especially for 21st century American Christianity, is that there's a prevalence of nihilism that just encroaches on how we look at the world. We all look at the world as if life is really only up to me, but things are ultimately out of my control. The universe is this vast, unfeeling, powerful, and I'm just kind of this insignificant, meaningless individual. And ultimately, my life will be forgotten, and nothing is to come of it.
Disappears. Yep.
And Ecclesiastes kind of meets you where you're at in that headspace, and has a way of cutting through some of the white noise that exists. And okay, if that's reality, what am I supposed to do about life? How am I supposed to live? What is the point of all of this? And it's honest.
Yeah.
It's like if you look
For sure.
strictly to your daily living, for your meaning, for your purpose, for the value, you will come up empty.
Right.
It will leave you absolutely meaningless.
Yeah.
It'll be totally vain.
I try to find, some rationale when I look at, and again, I'm speaking from my generational moment, when I see fellow 50-year-olds who are behaving like they're teenagers, I'm not saying, I'm not saying that you got to kind of grow old and decrepit, but I'm also asking the question, by the time you get to be, in your 50s, the need for speed should be replaced by the joy of wisdom. And so it's kind of weird in our world, and especially here in Scottsdale. I mean, the cars, the Botox, the clothing, the houses, the pursuits. I mean, where we live in the world is a place where you can be 50, 60, 70 and continue to behave like a teenager and really be, not only get away with it, but be affirmed for it. And I'm not saying, be a stick in the mud, but I'm also trying to figure out in my generational moment, there's a rhyme and reason to the way God has created humans to be born, to grow up, and then to grow old. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I lean into God's design, and what we learn in wisdom. Gray hair is the crown of the wise. The crown of the wise is not Botox plus, $1,000 hair color at the local salon. I'm not saying getting, hair color is a bad thing. I'm just saying that there is this tension I feel in the world that we're living in right now of trying to stay young forever. And I'm not trying to get old quickly, but I am trying to enjoy the fact that there's a value for some graying hair and some wisdom accrued over years that's then being poured out into the lives of others. And so that's my wrestle with the book of Ecclesiastes.
I think that on the one hand, Solomon's speaking from a place of privilege, accomplishment, wealth. Right. And so in a setting like ours, we can relate to some of the attitude that is communicated in those pages.
Right.
And I think that there's no clear, far-reaching condemnation for any of the lifestyle choices that appear in the pages of Ecclesiastes or that you might see out there
right.
in the world today. Enjoying life, traveling, having a nice house,
Sure.
Those kinds of things, enjoying time with your family.
Right.
None of them are just outrightly condemned. What needs to be cautioned against is the temptation to allow those things to totally obsess yourself inward and be totally consumed with, who am I? How do I look? What am I doing?
Yeah.
And Ecclesiastes actually helps you look outward and say, God's blessed you with things that aren't going to last forever.
Right.
How do you acknowledge that blessing and keep it in perspective of, okay, ultimately, a car's going to break down, my health will fail. But in the time that God's blessed me with these things, can I faithfully enjoy them?
Right.
Can I embrace the relationships I have with my family and know which of these things actually counts? Right. It's my relationship with my spouse, with my in-laws, with my parents, with my kids, with my coworkers. If I am not willing to set aside, things that turn me inward, then I'm going to lose out on those things that God has placed around me. Another little theological piece that I love about Ecclesiastes, and this is one that Professor Tim Seleska shared in my wisdom class, in the seminary, is that Ecclesiastes is linked to Romans 8, and I just want to share Romans 8, 20 to 21. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God.
Yeah.
In other words,
that's great.
God knows that life is meaningless if you're only looking, if your horizon is strictly life itself.
Yeah.
If you look to the things that exist in daily life, your career, your possessions, your health, you will wind up empty because everyone's end is guaranteed.
Right. Yeah.
6 feet under.
Yeah.
But there's hope that God has, that through Jesus, the eternal significance of all things will be recognized.
Yeah.
And so therefore, wisdom is found in fearing God, trusting in what he's told you about himself, and then living life keeping those blessings that he has given you for this life
Right.
in proper relation to yourself.
A wiser world is a better world. That is a true statement and outflow of reading the wisdom literature. A wiser world is a better world. In our youth, we pursue conquest and achievement. Get rich, get houses, get stuff, get. Ecclesiastes says at the end of life, give it away. Give wisdom to those who are younger. The sooner that you can get wisdom when you are younger, the better life is. That's the lesson of the first 9 chapters of Proverbs we talked about in the last podcast. So, that's for me where Ecclesiastes comes in, all these conquests, all this achievement, everything I have done, all I have amassed, Solomon says, is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind, because those are the things that are the intangibles. They don't last. And so what is the best thing? It's to eat, drink, and be merry, essentially. And to be able to say to your family and friends, these are the things that I've learned, and to help them be wiser and not be so fixated on achievement and conquest.
Before we get to that cherry on top of the podcast Sunday of Job,
Yes.
just want to touch on Ecclesiastes 12,
yeah.
the opening verses, this poetic kind of description of the end of life.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives this warning at the beginning of that chapter. He says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days overcome you.
Right.
If we are negligent and totally ignorant
So good.
of who God is and what he's done for us in our younger days,
Yep.
then it's going to be harder and harder for us to see him and to trust in him as we grow older. And therefore, some of our faculties begin to diminish, and including our emotional faculties, our rational faculties, and even just our general senses. And then he describes death in this beautiful, kind of twisted and dark, but very just rich way.
Yes.
As the grinders at the wheel grow silent, as the windows on the street start to close, the grasshopper drags itself along. Just this morning at the preschool, a grasshopper was like tormenting a couple of kids on their way in, flying around. It was young, but eventually it's going to be dragging itself along, and the world starts to grow dim. That's when we remember our Creator. He brought us everything in our lives in our youth.
Right.
He's going to receive us faithfully at the end of our days as well. Trust in him. Fear him. That's where wisdom is found.
Good point.
Thanks for this conversation. I love these books. This is one that I turn to again and again and again, and always find some grain of indisputable truth that's immediately applicable to what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And that gives me kind of a solid foundation and hope for the trust that we have in the God that's met us.
Yes, for sure. Okay, cherry on top.
Let's hear it.
So, as we've talked through the book of Proverbs last time, Job and Ecclesiastes, I think the question, can be raised. What world do we live in? Do we live in a Proverbs world where if you do good things happen? If we do bad things happen? Or do we live in a world where it's all chance? And Ecclesiastes, no matter what we do, we're toast. We're going to get burnt. It's all meaningless. We build and amass wealth, and then we give it to some, sluggard who, wastes it all in one fell swoop, give our inheritance away, and that's it. What world do we live in? Job is, for me, kind of the answer to that. When the book of Job begins, it starts out in a very Proverbs world. God says, look at Job. He's done good. He's lived righteously, and look how blessed he is. At the end of Job, by the way, God gives to Job double what he has because of his sustained righteousness throughout its pages. And then in the middle, we have this Ecclesiastes experience where Job, in spite of himself, gets absolutely shellacked by God through the devil. What kind of world do we live in? And on the basis of the book of Job, my answer is, by a 2-to-1 margin, we typically live in a Proverbs world. And therefore, if we do good things happen. If we're stupid and lazy and foolish, bad things will come our way. There is always the chance that on any given day an Ecclesiastes world will manifest itself, and we will get caught 6 ways from Sunday in negative or troublesome circumstances, but have faith. More often than not, as Job teaches us, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. I say that, John, because I think we are in a crisis of faith when it comes to the operation of this world. We have 8 billion people on this planet. We feel overwhelmed. Nihilism creeps across the globe. I'm just a little tiny speck in a wide open ocean of a universe. Is there any hope for me in this life? Is there any likelihood that I can somehow positively affect the world I'm living in and not just be a victim to circumstance? The answer from the wisdom literature is yes. On a 2-to-1 basis, generally speaking, make every effort to do good. And God has so woven the fabric of this world that generally good is returned for good, evil is returned for evil. And when circumstance happens, turn to God, trust that soon enough it'll probably turn around.
We go through a lot of seasons in life.
Yep.
Seasons where things seem to be going as we predict, and maybe that's most of the time. And then we go through seasons where suffering seems to be the rule of the day,
right,
and it doesn't make sense to us. Maybe we recognize we made mistakes,
right,
and are somewhat responsible for the suffering that we're experiencing, but many times we're so confused and lost in it. And what these books show us is that in that place, God is willing to hear you and walk with you through them. One of the songs that we sing at Mountain View on occasion, and it's more of a performative, reflective song that the congregation takes in rather than sings along, is called "Where Were You" by the band Ghost Ship, and it's a song's version of Job and God's answer to Job. So I just want to read the first and last chorus of that verse of that song to you. It says, it opens with this line: "I said, God, I do not understand this world. Everything's dying and broken. Why do I see nothing but suffering? I'm asking, could this be your plan? Sin has taken hold of the whole land. Will you not say anything else to me?" And then it adapts God's 3-chapter, just absolute, just barrage of answer. Where were you the day that I laid the foundations of the world, the day I cracked wide open the sea, the day I built the continents upon the lands, when I established people and established all things, the weather? Can you stop a storm? Can you cause rain to sprout the deserts with forest? And then it closes, can you hunt the prey for your lions? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Is the whole world bending beneath your will? And then the speaker once again raises his voice. He says, I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, and although I had no right to ask, my God knelt and answered me. And it closes with that line of, even though Job is just being absolutely reminded of his size in comparison to God,
right,
the fact that God meets him
Yep.
and speaks to him
So good.
shows us the merciful heart of our Creator.
So good.
And reminds us that even in these storms, we have a place to go.
Love
We have someone a Father who loves us and is willing to hear us.
That's great.
So super excited for this series, super excited to walk through these books with our congregation. Always an encouragement to walk through them with you.
Thank you.
And we thank you for joining us for this episode of Valley Chat, a more devotional, scriptural-focused conversation today. And we encourage you to check out our other offerings and stick with us as we explore other ideas around church, around leadership, around devotion, as we strive to be a voice of encouragement and support in your walk with God each and every day. We'll see you next time.